the host of the Ricky Cobb Show and a brand new newsletter that you need to subscribe to, the Ricky Cobb Rewind, both at Outkick.com, joins me now. What's up, Ricky?
How you doing, Will? I'm good, brother. It's been a minute. Good to be back.
It has been. I'm glad to have you back. Glad to have you here on this edition of Cain on Sports. Late night last night in the NBA, and for that matter, by the way, Ricky, as well, the Women's College World Series. I actually watched the end of both Texas Tech versus Texas and the Indiana Pacers versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I think there's something interesting to come out of both. Let's talk for a minute about the NBA Finals. I went into this, and most people thought that the Oklahoma City Thunder are one of the most dominant teams in recent memory. They play defense. They obviously have an incredible superstar in NBA MVP Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And yet they're at the end with the last shot of the game. The only time they led the entire game, Tyrese Halliburton hits the game winner for the Indiana Pacers. It was, by the way, an incredible night in the city of Oklahoma City as both those Women's College World Series and NBA Finals were taking place in Oklahoma City. But I guess we never counted on Tyrese Halliburton arriving at the dominant superstar of a game that takes over and hits the game-winning shot. I don't know if it's going to last for an entire series, Ricky, but it was a surprising start to the NBA Finals.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw the line on the first game, and I thought, man, that's a lot of points that we're laying here. I think the line was somewhere around 9 or 10 at tip-off, Will. This Indiana Pacers team, they're built different. You're absolutely right. The Thunder were the best team in the league, class of the league, great defense, a very well-rounded team. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, obviously the MVP of the league, and for good reason. But this Indiana team is feisty, man. We have seen it time and again in these playoffs, coming back against the Cleveland Cavaliers with, under a minute left, erasing a 7-point deficit. We saw them come back against the New York Knicks a couple of times, big victories there at Madison Square Garden. So they do it again in Game 1 of the NBA Finals. So look, I think the Thunder, you got to maintain them as the favorites, even losing Game 1 in the fashion that they did at home. But let me tell you something. This Indiana Pacers team, they are live underdogs. There's no doubt about it. And Tyrese Halliburton, what a coming out for him in this postseason. He is a legitimate superstar now. There's no question about it. And listen, I give the Pacers a real chance here to pull an upset.
I don't know what the odds were, what the bet was at the beginning of the season for the Indiana Pacers to win it all, but it had to have paid off handsomely if they pulled this off. And it's kind of one of those things where I think that the Oklahoma City Thunder are inevitable. They're going to win the NBA title. But we keep underestimating the Pacers. We keep letting them surprise us. And if they did pull it off, it would be one of the biggest long shots, I think, in NBA history to win the title. And it would be a fascinating discussion then, where does that team rank, in terms of long shots? Now, it's not Leicester City winning the Premier League, which was 250-1, and that was only 250-1 because the betting odds were capped at that big of a long shot. It would have been more if the betting houses didn't cap it. But I don't even know off the top of my head what the comp would be if the Pacers just kept surprising us, if the Pacers won the title. I mean, the NBA is a league and a history of dynasties, of dominant teams, of predictability. And I don't know what your historical comp would be if we crowned the Indiana Pacers.
Yeah, the NBA is not a situation where you see Cinderellas making runs through the playoffs. As you said, in the 1980s, it was the Celtics and the Lakers trading it every year. And the one year between 1980 and 1988 that the Celtics or Lakers didn't hoist the trophy, it was the Philadelphia 76ers with Julius Erving and Moses Malone. So you go to the 90s, right? The Bulls dynasty during that period. Hakeem Olajuwon grabbing a couple of championships while Michael Jordan was playing baseball. And we've seen it time and again, as you said, whether you're talking about the early 2000s LA Lakers, whether you're talking about the San Antonio Spurs dynasty. We just don't see it. 7-game series, 5-on-5 in the NBA, the better team typically wins. And yeah, you might get a series upset here or there that takes your breath away. But to see a team like the Pacers just navigate their way through the playoffs as they have to this point and find themselves up 1-0 in the NBA Finals, regardless of how this thing plays out, it's rather extraordinary. Sure. I agree with you.
Yeah, I don't want to do Mike Greenberg and start predicting how big of a dynasty is this Indiana Pacers team after a 1-0 lead. But I do find, let's be careful. We've been dismissive of the Pacers. We continue to be dismissive of the Pacers. And my brain goes to two teams, and I do not think they're as big a surprise as this Pacers team would be. And that's the Detroit Pistons of whatever it is. Is it 2004? And the Dallas Mavericks of 2011. But the Dallas Mavericks of 2011 are part of a bigger story. And that is that going on for a while now, I guess the Mavericks were right before the Warriors dynasty. But after post-Warriors dynasty, I think we've had a different NBA champion for how many years in a row now? And so what it marks is a change in the NBA. We're in the era of pure parity. We're in the era of no dynasties. In fact, if you like dynasties, I think your only real hope right now is the Oklahoma City Thunder. All right, but speaking of these dynasties, my producer Tinfoil Pat, Ricky, brought this up, and I think he has a very different opinion than I do. And I'm going to bet that you do as well. So here's the question for you. Do you think you could pull a team from the past? You can go with NBA or NFL, whatever you would like. Old school team, 70s, 80s, I'll even give you 90s, and bring them forward into the future, and they would be similarly dominant in their sport. Could the 70s Steelers step on the field and make a run in the NFL?
Well, Will, I think there are individual players from the NFL in the 70s and the 80s that would succeed in today's game. Walter Payton, if you drop 1977 Walter Payton into the NFL this season, he'd probably run for close to 2,000 yards. But a team is a different proposition because these linemen today are so big. Any 1970s team, including the Steelers dynasty, and I say this as the 70s guy, but you got to be honest about this. As much as I glorify these teams of my youth and as much genuine affection as I have for them, and as much as I believe that there are individual players who could succeed now, they would absolutely get pushed around at the line of scrimmage, and there would be no chance. Terry Bradshaw wouldn't have a second to think about where he was going to throw the ball because his line it would be dwarfed by every defensive line in the NFL. And then the same thing on the other side of the ball. Mean Joe Green, maybe Mean Joe Green with modern training would go out there and be a great player today. But in terms of going up against these 350-pound gigantic offensive linemen that every team is rolling out there, I don't think in the NFL there's a hope in hell that a team from the 70s or the 80s would be able to compete today. NBA,
yeah, if you look back,
give me the 96 Bulls, maybe 72-10, Michael Jordan. They might, if we dropped Rodman and Pippen and Jordan in the league today, it might be a different story. They would at least have a shot. But the NFL, no doubt in my mind, it's a non-starter.
Okay, first on the NFL, yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but I think if you looked at the offensive line of teams from the 1970s, you had an average of, let's call it 270 pounds of the starters on the offensive line. I mean, you would have had guys starting on the offensive line that weighed 250 and some that got up to 290, maybe 300. You don't have a guy under 300 anymore on an average NFL team. And it isn't that they're big, fat, slow guys. They are bigger, stronger, faster. And that puts me in this position, Ricky. I'm even skeptical that you can bring superstars from the old days and put them on the field today, and they would be able to, Earl Campbell has to be able to make a roster, but he's not running over guys like he was in the 70s. He's just not going to. And I just don't, it's always more fun to argue for nostalgia. It's way more fun than to say, I'm sorry, but Shai Gilgeous-Alexander would destroy the 80s and 90s NBA. But it's true. If you look back at videos, and I've had some guys bring this up to me, of like highlights from the NBA in the 90s, do you know how much more space they had to do whatever what, for example, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is doing in fractional and incremental amounts of space compared to what Michael Jordan had to deal with is a totally different game. Now, careful. What are you saying, Will? Are you actually saying SGA is better than Jordan? No, I'm not. But I'm telling you, everybody wants to say, this is everybody's favorite argument, it's softer. What about the hard fouls from yesterday? Let me tell you something. I don't think you can hard foul something you can't catch. And I'm telling you, it's so much faster today. The bigger, stronger, faster nature of human evolution, as most pronounced in sports, is simply the nature of sports. Like, you're always looking for the guy. They were then, they are now. And the bottom line is now, everybody is bigger, stronger, faster than they were then. And so my argument is there is no team in any of those sports, including the 90s Bulls, that could step onto the field or the court today and play with certainly the champions and maybe not even the average team of these respective leagues. And I'm doubtful, Ricky. I mean, you went with Walter Payton. I'd stick with Jordan. Because that one, no, it's like, that one feels like sacrilege to say anything separate, but I don't know. You think Walter Payton on the field today would be a top 5 running back in the NFL?
I think he'd be the best running back in the NFL. But that's God. Walter Payton. Yeah.
Well, hold on. Do you know?
I really do.
I mean, we should look this up. Do you know what was Walter Payton's 40? Give me his size and how big was Walter Payton? I would love to know some stats to see how it translates.
Well, I look at Marshawn Lynch, Derrick Henry. I don't think those guys are necessarily superhuman, and they're running over dudes. I think greatness, like transcendent greatness, I think can play in any era. And you got to keep in mind, these guys from the old days, they didn't have the training methods that we have today. They didn't have the treatments. They'd be better if they had access to the things that modern players have. So if we're going to pull him out of the 70s and 70s training methods and drop him from Bears training camp 1977 into the NFL, I'm not saying that's going to translate, but if you bring him in, Walter Payton, the gifts that he had, the work ethic that he had, and you gave him the same level playing field that all of these guys benefit from today, I think that greatness would play. Now, let me ask you a question, Will. If Michael Jordan, let's say the 1996 Chicago Bulls, 72-10, regarded by many as the greatest team in NBA history, if you brought that team to the modern time, now, what do you think their regular season record would be?
God, basketball is so tough. And this is nostalgia. You're dealing with like myth and romance in my head, you know? But I remember having this debate on ESPN, those teams versus the Golden State Warriors with Steph Curry and Draymond Green and Klay Thompson and Kevin Durant. And I mean, that is legitimately not just one of the most dominant teams in NBA history, but played basketball in modern day equivalent the right way. You know what I mean? Like, they were smart, the Warriors. They weren't just 5 dudes who tried to out athleticism you. They could shoot. They moved off the ball. I don't know what the Bulls' record would be, but look, Rodman and Pippen are going to do some Rodman and Pippen things, but you know what? That version of Draymond Green is pretty close to Dennis Rodman. Like, he might be better, quite honestly, than Dennis Rodman. And then what? KD versus Scottie Pippen, Steph versus Michael Jordan. I'm just going with that Warriors team because that's the most recent vintage of that debate that I can think of. I don't know who I put my money on, Ricky. I think I might put it on the Warriors.
I think it's close, and the Warriors' advantages are obviously how much the game has changed. You bring the Bulls into the league, they don't have the three-point shooting capabilities that we see today. The NBA has changed so much. To me, that complicates the question more than any other single issue, is just how much the game has changed. 40% or whatever it is of field goal attempts or from three-point range. The Bulls just weren't doing that. You go back to the 1986 Celtics, a team that went 50-1 at home, including the playoffs. A team that was stacked with Hall of Famers, right? Bird, McHale, Parrish, Dennis Johnson.
And by the way,
Bill Walton coming off the bench.
This is a good thought experiment, to your point. Do you think those Celtics would come into the modern-day NBA and dominate or even compete highly? The answer is no. They're not.
Listen, I have Bob Ryan on my program who knows more about basketball than just about anybody. Now, granted, we could argue that Bob is a little biased for the Celtics, given that they've been such a big part of his professional life. But Bob believes that the 86 Celtics could have beaten the best Warriors team in a 7-game series.
Okay, here's the thought experiment. Do you think the 70s Celtics with Bill Russell and John, who else was on that team? John Havlicek? I can't remember who the studs are.
Russell retired in 69, but Havlicek, those guys. Yeah. 60s dynasty.
Do you think those
Red
guys,
Auerbach years?
Okay, take the 60s
No,
dynasty.
I think.
Would they?
Yeah. I don't think they would. I think Bill Russell would be a great player today, but no, I think athletically, I absolutely agree with you. There is a cutoff point somewhere in the past with every team, every sport. And we can debate about where that cutoff line is, Will, but I agree with you that it's there. I don't think the 1927 Yankees could roll into the American League tomorrow and, win their division by any means.
So the question is, but you're exactly right. What is the cutoff point? Everybody would acknowledge a 60s team is vastly different. Okay. An 80s team, we're talking about 40 years ago now, right? Do you think how about this? Do you think those 60s Celtics could have competed with the 90s Bulls? I think you and I both know the answer is no. We would have said no. And part of it is the 30 years of advancement of the game and the player. Well, guess what? We're further removed from those 80s Celtics today than those 90s Bulls were from those 60s Celtics. So it's like in our minds, because it happened in our lifetime, we think, oh, those 80s Celtics or those 90s Bulls, that was just yesterday. It was 30 years of advancement ago, right? So I don't know what that cutoff point is either, but I think we're probably onto something that 30 years ago is probably a lot of time, that the whole game has changed and the players have changed.
Well, look, it's changed a lot, and the years slip by, right? The year 1995 perpetually feels like it's about, 15 years ago to me. And then I look back and I think, wait a minute, Seinfeld's been off the air for almost 30 years. How did that happen? And why do I have so much gray in my beard? So it sneaks up on us sometimes, right? I do agree with you on that regard. But hey, look, think about this Pacers team, right? That we're talking about, this plucky Pacers team that probably has no business being in the position they're in, but somehow they've gotten here. I don't know. What do you think? Tyrese Halliburton and the 2025 Pacers against the 96 Bulls. Do we both agree that the Bulls would take care of them? But they're currently ahead of the, in the finals. What about the Oklahoma City Thunder against the 96 Bulls?
See, that's tougher because I actually think the Thunder are a really incredible team. They're an incredible defensive team. People don't realize, the casual fan doesn't realize that because all you ever think about is offense, but they're an incredible defensive team. We'll see. The Thunder got to earn their way into that debate. Hey, speaking of time traveling then, Ricky, if you could go back in time and relive one championship, one run, one title, or even just one team that fell short but that captured your heart, or one game, what would it be?
Well, for me, the sporting event, and I've thought about this one on more than one occasion, Will, the athletic spectacle that I most wish I could have been there in person to experience everything about it, live as it happened, is the Rumble in the Jungle, Zaire, Africa, in 1974, when Muhammad Ali regained the heavyweight championship by knocking out George Foreman. That is my personal pinnacle. That's the one that I wish I could have breathed in the air, experienced the electricity that was going on that night with the crowd, and see a real piece of history. Because I think that is the greatest upset, certainly in boxing. People talk about Buster Douglas and Mike Tyson. George Foreman was a killing machine. Somebody on the level of Buster Douglas had no chance against George Foreman. Muhammad Ali was probably the only person that could have pulled that off. And after 7 years, after having his title stripped away from him to win it back when nobody thought he could do it, I wish I could have been there.
That's a good answer. See, when I was asked this question, I went back in my own life, not historical moments that I would have liked to have been a part of. And I'm probably of equal measure to you nostalgic, at least when it comes to the things that capture my heart. So it's probably going to come as no surprise. I mean, the 90s Cowboys are my childhood, my youth, my teen years, with my dad and my brothers. I remember being at the Rose Bowl for the first one when they blew out the Bills and looking around. It felt like a who's who of celebrities. Speaking of Walter Payton, I saw him. I think I saw Sugar Ray Leonard. I saw all these guys, there. The 2011 Dallas Mavericks, and for that matter of a similar vintage, the 2023 Texas Rangers, were amazing championships because they felt like catharsis, relief, like hard-earned titles. Like, all the suffering has finally paid off. But the one that brought me then and brought me the most joy probably since, and I wasn't there in person, so I'd love to go back, is the 2005 Texas Longhorns. Vince Young versus the USC Trojans, 4th and 7, running for the touchdown. I think that's the one I go back and relive.
Yeah, there's a real strong argument that is, maybe all things considered, the greatest game in the history of college football. If I'm looking back at my own history as a fan, I would go back to the summer that I fell in love with baseball, 1978. I turned 7 that year, and the Yankees, coming from 14 games back, chasing down the Boston Red Sox, catching them, and then the Bucky effing Dent game, the one-game playoff, the 163rd regular season game for both teams to settle that division, and he puts one into the net over the monster. I was watching it on my 19-inch Zenith TV that my dad bought back in the mid-'70s. And that summer and that team, and then the Yankees going on and winning the World Series, that lit the spark for me, for a lifetime of being a baseball fan. So to go back and experience that again would be pretty special for me. To be there at Fenway Park and see Bucky Dent put it into the net, I might have just ascended into heaven, Will, right at that moment.
Okay, for the record, Walter Payton, 5'10", 200, 4'4", Marshawn Lynch, who you invoked, 5'11", 215, 4'4", Not that far apart. I would suggest that Marshawn Lynch's weight is probably undercounted, so he's a bigger dude than Walter Payton was. Similar speed, and that's the nature of what we're talking about. I don't think that undercuts your argument. I don't think that says Walter Payton wouldn't. But I will say at 5'10", 200, you're in the scat back range. You're not in the power back range in the modern NFL.
Well, I don't know now. This is Walter Payton we're talking about. And if Walter Payton played today, he would definitely have 10 or 15 pounds more muscle on him. It was a different expectation in that era. He didn't need it. It's like when Holyfield bulked up to fight Larry Holmes. If Walter Payton knew he was coming into this era, believe me, the training methods that we have now, it would be a bigger, stronger, faster Walter Payton, I think.
All right, finally, last topic here with Ricky Cobb today. I spent last night watching Game 2 of the Women's College World Series. Now, I don't really get into softball. A lot of people do, by the way. I think it rates pretty well, but I don't normally get into it, but my Texas Longhorns are there. against the Texas Tech Red Raiders. My wife is from Lubbock. Her dad taught at Tech, so she was rooting for I don't even know if we call them the Lady Longhorns or the Lady Red Raiders anymore. I think we've dropped the Lady, which we shouldn't. But it was the Longhorns versus the Red Raiders. Longhorns won game 1. This was game 2, and I watched Texas Tech's pitcher dominate last night to bring the series even for the final game tonight in the Women's College World Series. And what was fascinating about it was this pitcher for the Red Raiders. And her name is like Najah Kennedy. I think I've got it roughly right. She pitched for Stanford, Ricky, for 2 years. Now she's with the Red Raiders. I read an article after the game. I don't know how much you know about her, but she's getting pretty well known. She makes $1 million a year at Texas Tech. Texas Tech, by the way, has something called the Matador Club, and they have decided to go all in. Everybody thinks it's just football. They've got the #1 transfer portal class in the country this year in college football. But they didn't just go in on football. They're going in on everything. They want to win everything. And the guy that started the Matador Club, one of the co-founders, he's got Double Eagle Oil Company. He's hugely rich. He was rumored along with Nick Saban to be part of President Trump's commission on college football, and so forth. But I just found it pretty fascinating, A, how good that game was and how good she is, and B, how much Texas Tech has gone in on all sports and is it sustainable? What happens when the House comes to a settlement? Does it undercut it? And see like what you're willing to pay for when it comes to softball. Fascinating. The whole thing is fascinating because we only ever talk about this when it comes to football. But it's everything, including women's sports like softball.
I mean, we're on our way to college sports being professional sports. It already is if you're a football player. It already is if you're a big-time college hoops player. The men's game anyway.
But Ricky, there's no women's softball pro. Like, there's no place to go from there.
Right.
So isn't it interesting that on some of these sports, the peak of your earnings capability will be rich guys at certain schools that want to dominate a sport that has no revenue?
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna sock away, your nest egg when you're in your late teens and early 20s for a lot of these student athletes. Look, I don't know how profitable softball is to these colleges. I don't know what the financial calculus is. If it's just a matter of we want the bragging rights of dominating everything and we believe there's value in that, then I suppose that's a decision that they're free to make. I don't know if other colleges and universities are going to follow that model. If I'm an AD somewhere and I'm looking at, the landscape, I mean, how many millions of dollars are you going to pump into any sport that doesn't generate any money for you? How much appetite do you have for that?
The answer is that Texas Tech makes no, and I don't think anybody does, makes no money on softball. They lose money on softball. And you're right. It becomes, until we get this thing figured out, the most important recruit of any program is the billionaire recruit that's going to fund your sports. That's the most important recruit of any program.
That's a great point. The person that has the bottomless pile of money, that's the person that's going to be more instrumental. The athletes come and go. You get somebody there that's willing to fund things. That you're absolutely right. That's the key individual in all of it. And
it could be everybody needs to get used to Texas Tech in whatever sport. All right, Ricky Cobb. Check him out at the Ricky Cobb Show at Outkick.com and subscribe to the newsletter at Ricky Cobb Rewind. Ricky, it's always great to talk to you. Thanks for being on with us.
Will, it is always a pleasure, my friend. Look forward to seeing you next time.